supposing on a Saturday, someone in Maynard has a problem, and someone hires a lawyer that's smart enough to read through this, and they see that there's no Saturday dates, no Saturday times listed. Where does that take us? Or where does that take the owner of the license? Because if Saturday's not listed as a time of opening, can they be open on a Saturday? And shouldn't we correct that pretty quick?
Ms. Steele brought that up a moment ago, and I noted that I'm gonna get revisions to this on the alcohol licenses as well.
And in an application, on the statement of a application, it's 6 days and the 7th day. So the 6 days are counted
So it's
as-
listed as 6
Monday.
days instead of weekdays
Right, correct, on
on
the
the full application, okay.
That probably goes back to the blue law days when everybody
going
was
to-
closed on Sunday.
To Chris's point then, that
Please,
if we did have an
it says here,
issue,
please indicate what days and hours the license, 8 AM to 1 AM weekdays, 11 AM to 1 AM Sundays. No Saturday on this.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's the same way on the full application.
So we need to get that cleared up.
yeah, we need to have the,
That's the state application, Chris?
Local licensing authority review.
That's the
record.
sign-off one.
Yeah.
State.
Yep.
So going back to the host community agreement, so that would be up to the Board of Selectmen whether or not to sign if we did get this person to apply seeking an application?
So they've already met with us, they talked to us about where the zones were and what they were allowed to do, and they've gone out to a local landlord to negotiate a lease.
Yeah.
And they've come back to us and said, you know, we have an agreement, but, you know, we're not gonna sign it unless we know the town's gonna sign the host community agreement.
Right,
So
that would be
Well-
the Board of Selectmen though, that's my question.
that is, you're the local licensing
Okay,
authority.
so that's what we voted on for the warrant item, really
Sure.
is the host agreement.
no, that was the
The host,
grounds.
yeah, the host agreement is essentially like the liquor license,
Okay,
it just has a different name for it.
gotcha.
Well,
But like you issue a liquor license, you will sign a host community agreement.
And is it a majority vote of the Board of Selectmen? Cause I assume this is gonna be kind of a hot topic if it's the first one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it could be a 3-2 vote.
I was under the impression that the host community agreement goes well beyond what you just described.
It's analogous, it's not identical.
Because my understanding of the community host agreement from the way that, as this law has developed, and I think, first off, this raises the second point that I want to make, but first off, I thought it was more in tune with a development agreement versus because you can get mitigation as a result of the community host agreement based on how it will impact your public service, how it will impact whatever it may be. So it's not just the permission from the Board of Selectmen to go ahead and move forward. And so if we're going to be on the forefront of this, which it sounds like, people may want to be, I go back to the comment that Melissa made, that I think we better wait to find out, first off, what the state's instructing communities to do before we go agreeing to a host community agreement or whatever, and then learn that Maynard dropped the ball because we could have been asking for $300,000 in a, and that's just a number to throw out, in a gift to the community to accommodate for our public safety. Now, I may be all off on that, but I think that's the way I understood when council was in speaking about
But this is,
community host
right.
agreement.
this is just medical though, and medical's already been in place for a while.
No, this is a
no.
retail, it's an
I
RMD
thought you said it
seeking
was a-
retail.
The
So anyway,
applicant has a medical
I
license.
know we've had Kate Federoff come in a couple times, and Kate Hogan is, I have to get in touch with her, I talked to her the other day about this, when we were walking on Memorial Day together, and I asked her about, where, is the state done and put the marijuana piece to bed yet? And she said no, but, and she also, in saying no, said, oh, I have a person that can come, a representative, a local representative that can come out and talk to you guys at some point, because she's been one of the people, creating the regulations on the state level, and she could come out and tell us her take on where we are and where we should be, so, I'm not in a rush, but if there are other, to David's point, if there are other concerns and other issues that are still unresolved at any level, we should have them. I'm not, just because the owner of a license that, town of Acton decided that they wanted to place a moratorium on marijuana sales in their town, she suddenly shifted her attention to Maynard. That's not my problem.
I don't disagree.
So I'm not in a rush to do anything because somebody's other deal fell through. Now they want to push it through here and tell me, oh, I have to be open by July 1st, I wanna get moving by July 1st. Not my problem, not our problem, not Maynard's problem. Our problem is to make sure that we do it right so that down the road, there's not 5 other people sitting here wondering what we did wrong. So I'm slow and easy with this, and I'll get in touch with Kate and we'll have that other person come in. Because I imagine there'll be some differences in her take as opposed to, Attorney Federoff's case. And certainly when we have her come in, I'll invite Attorney Federoff to come and be part of that discussion as well, so that we do all end up on the same page and, in the right place.
I
before we
certainly
do
want to
that.
make sure that we don't, we don't want to write the first community host agreement in the state. Because I don't know if there are others out there, and if there are, I'd like to see a sample one.
I apologize for not attaching it to this. If you look in the executive content, there's a summary. The drafts were going back and forth with Kate Federoff, and I neglected to attach the current version. David, you're correct about it being somewhat analogous to a development agreement. The amount of money that can be extracted is quite modest and set in the regulations. And I think the chairman's suggestion that we bring in some other experts to advise the board on this is excellent.
So,
I don't care if we're first or 101st, I just want us to be correct.
I totally agree.
so just so I'm tracking, from a process perspective, there's the regulation piece for the 2 categories of establishment, drafts of which we have before us. Our next step with that is to provide to you any comments or questions that we have about the current drafts. I would say that one of the questions along those lines to Attorney Federoff would be, does she know the extent to which communities that kind of voted the same way we have, where do they stand on the approval of regulations? So just under the category, are we first movers? Are there others that have, where do we kind of stand within the pack? So then we can, because the regulations piece is a standalone. Then there's this question about the host community agreements, what those look like and how those are. So I think we kind of have the same questions for both, but I just want to make sure that we stay on track on the categories of stuff that we have to look at and think about.
Fair enough.
I concur.
On the regulations themselves, I know we'll eventually get to the nitty-gritty of them, but in a brief review, maybe over time, things can evolve, and as we learn more about this industry and how it works or whatever. But I have a little bit of a problem if we were to immediately allow for transfer of licenses, given especially
Yeah.
that we don't know anything
Absolutely not.
about it. So I would say that we not allow, and I know it was in there as something that we have the option on, that we would not allow for transfer of any licenses for marijuana
review.
establishments until we have a full understanding, so that we're not selling licenses to any old Joe that comes walking down the street. I know they need state approval, but I
Yeah.
think this is a new industry with a new, that we have to be very careful about.
It's why
Agreed.
you guys are the local licensing authority. The buck stops here.
Okay, so,
Cool, all right. So,
I think the first thing we need to do is, I'll get in touch with Kate and see who she had in mind to come talk to us. But I think in the meantime, we ought to just all look at those 3 documents, the regulations, the marijuana non-retail establishment regulations, and then the community host community agreements, and just, look at them and see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and then we'll, make time on an upcoming agenda to go over those 3 documents, based on what we see as individuals, and then share those thoughts with Kate Federoff.
I'd also like to ask that we get the police chief's thoughts on, some of these regulations as well.
He'll be here soon enough. He'll be back. He's away for a couple of weeks, but he'll be back.
Can you send us that community host agreement?
You'll get it tonight.
Okay, great.
It's just- It wasn't sendable when I created the packet and
All
I
right.
forgot about it.
Aaron, you need more than 15 minutes?
no.
Simmer down. Okay.
I think it's more of a reflective question on us. Do we think Aaron will need
We
more
don't
than
have,
15?
we don't have to stop promptly at 7:15. We just shouldn't start anything else until,
Got it.
Okay, you're up, sir. We moved on to item number 11 on the agenda, Public Works Water and Sewer bids.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
the stuff you sent me is in their
Okay.
devices.
So I have included a number of attachments to the board docs. I guess the first thing that I will cover is the drilling schedule for the new well. So as presented a couple months ago, we talked about the water sources and the issues that we had. And with 06G well on Rockland Avenue, we're gonna be abandoning that well. Earlier was referenced that we got permit approval to proceed with construction of a new well. So 06G, we will start that on June 11th. There's a drilling schedule. Looks like a calendar is one of the attachments that shows that the drilling will take about a week to complete the drilling. And then we're gonna be setting some pumps, doing some pumping tests for the next couple of weeks. And then sampling period and continuing pumping through July, sampling throughout. So that'll take about a month and a half should the scheduler show up, or the driller show up on schedule on Monday. There's another photo that's kind of an aerial photo, looks like this. That's the a map of the drilling location. You can see where Rockland Avenue is referenced. The gray rectangle is the building, the water treatment plant, and then the current well, Rockland 06G, at the center of the 400-foot Zone 1 radius. And just next to that is there a proposed replacement well where we'll be conducting the drilling activities next week. Hopefully all goes well and we hit water and we only have to drill one hole. So we'll know after that second, we're drilling next week, and we'll know after that initial 24-hour pump test whether or not we hit water or we have to go on the other side of the existing well and drill a second hole.
So if we end up having to do the second hole, it doesn't necessarily shift the schedule
It'll probably
that much, maybe
it'll
a
delay
day or
it
two.
delay it another week.
Okay,
Takes a week to drill another hole. So
gotcha,
yeah, all the highlighted yellow,
All of that
11th
would
through the
fall.
15th is drilling.
got it. Thank you.
What's the actual distance, if you know, what the actual distance between where the broken well is and where the new well will be drilled?
Just about 11, 12 feet away.
Oh, it's that close, okay, because it doesn't look that close on this map, that's why I
Yeah,
see.
it's right there, right outside. So the current well, and there's a well and there's a vault, and they're enclosed in a fence. We just have to open the fence.
So
add
is
a
the
couple
broken
sections.
well where it says Rockwell
06G?
06G?
Yes.
Okay, I thought the broken well was where it said Rockwell number 4.
Yep. 06G is the well that is going to be abandoned. And then you can kind of see that perimeter. There's a perimeter fence
Yep.
right around that.
Yep.
To the left is the replacement well. To the right is a original test well from when the original. It's a monitoring well.
Okay,
The original wells were drilled.
okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so our other active wells are to the left, where it says Rockwell number 5 and Rockwell number 2, that are connected to those discharge pipes. All the other red dots, the one just to the southwest, Rockwell number 4, that's a monitoring well. Same with the other one, Rockwell number 6.
Got it.
So they had some weird numbers when they first originally drilled these wells, and we've since changed them. And the only active ones are in this area, are 06G, 07G, and 05G.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. So on that same topic, I've recommended to the town administrator and recommended to the board tonight that we move forward with an emergency water ban townwide. So we currently have our calendar water ban in effect. It's a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 7-day-a-week, non-essential outdoor water use restriction that's enacted every calendar year, May 1st to October 30th, or excuse me, September 30th, as part of our withdrawal permit for a Water Management Act permit. So I'm recommending that we elevate that just based on the current usage and the demand, and to try to get ahead of any anticipated shortfalls that we will surely encounter should we have some warmer season. If we hadn't had such a wet spring and early summer, we would be in a tougher spot right now, but definitely want to get ahead of it. It's definitely a recommendation that I have to this department, or to the board, so that we can make sure we can continue to provide safe drinking water and fire protection to the town, residents, businesses of Maynard. It's definitely critical. I know that it's not ideal for residents and rate users. People want to use their water and keep the green grass, but, you know, we're in a pretty serious situation right now, where if we potentially don't enact a further water ban at this time and people continue to irrigate their lawns, we won't be able to keep up with the max day demand that was presented in that one PowerPoint in early April.
Yeah.
What level are you proposing?
So an emergency water ban still ban all outdoor water use.
24/7.
So handheld watering everyone and gardens and flowers and everything?
Washing your car.
Yeah, so there are exceptions to that, and we're gonna work with so what's gonna happen is, over the next couple of weeks, DEP is gonna issue us an administrative consent order. And the reason they're issuing that is to expedite the drilling process and the permitting process for this new well. If we didn't wanna expedite it and get that consent order, it would take a couple of years to get this well online. So as part of the consent order, they're gonna have mandates and requirements. One of them is gonna be an outdoor water restriction. So we're just jumping the gun. We're moving on it early, which they recommend doing, and the other water districts in our area recommend doing as well. So, you know, there are exceptions to that. Exception, health and safety. You know, if you have a vegetable garden, you have some herbs and, you know, or some tomatoes, something you're trying to grow that are, you know, it's reasonable use. You know, we don't want to see people out there washing their cars, power washing their houses unnecessarily, irrigating their lawns with a sprinkler system. You know, so we do have an enforcement authority and regulation. There's bylaws, which I did print out copies for you to review for you, which I can hand out to you. But Chapter 31 of our bylaws, pumps, wells, fountains, authorizes the town to issue fines to residents that don't abide by the water restriction, and that's even the current restriction we have, the 9 to 5. I have yet to issue a fine in my time as DPW director. Usually it's a phone call or just a knock on the door just to educate the public on the situation where we're at, accomplishes that.
And
So.
to that end, Aaron, I mean, do you guys, does the department have a communications plan?
So
So
we
depending
do
on
it.
tonight's vote, sort of how to push the news out there, but not just the news of the decision and the ban, but kind of to help
Why?
further the education around the why.
So what I would recommend is that we move to make this effective for Monday, next Monday, so it gives time for my department to educate the public. We're gonna put something on the town website that'll go into detail about water restrictions and why we have them. We also have signboards already made that I have in stock, which don't go into too much detail. They just say to reference the website or call the department
Yep.
for more information. There's the changeable construction sign, police sign that we have down at 11727 that we'll update that. And, you know, we'll do a reverse 911 and just direct people to the town website, which will include links to DEP that show.
And we might want to do like a tight script that Stephanie could record that kind of at least does the highlights, because I do think that, I mean, having sat through the longer presentation that went through the detail of the water picture and the risks and the importance of the well, I think helping to reinforce to people that component of it may at least help mitigate some of the dialogue.
Agreed. We did something similar 2 years ago. 2016 was the last time we enforced the full water restriction when there was the drought declared throughout the Commonwealth. So I have some similar kind of verbiage. Obviously, I'll change it to you know, the reasons why today we're moving forward with that.
Thank you.
When do you want to do that, right now?
Yeah, if we could take a motion and move forward.
Motion. It's already written. All right. Given that, I make a motion that we move to impose the emergency water ban effective Monday, June 11th. This ban means that there is no outdoor watering permitted 24 hours a day until the ban is lifted. Do you have a second?
Second?
Any discussion about the water ban?
No
All
further.
in favor? Unfortunately.
Thank you. Yeah, we look to we work with the DEP to get this online as soon as possible. After talking to them, I don't anticipate them allowing us to reduce the restriction this season, even if we do get this well online and running before August. That was a question that I did ask them, and they said that they would, part of that administrative consent order, they would continue the outdoor water restrictions until they're sure that this well can be maintained and
Yeah,
Fly.
the education piece is critical because, you know, you see on social media already that people are upset about the mandatory water ban that we put in annually anyway. And there's not even an understanding that that's there annually, no choice of our own. And now to have, you know, because it's raining today, so, you know, people are gonna say, why do we need a water ban? So it's critical.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I've been asked by a number of people, and I'm not trying to throw stones or water at any particular business, but I was asked about the use of water outside of the water ban times by Clock Tower, by the Mill and Main folks in their front, and I know that they're trying to establish a lawn, so that's one of the exceptions that we have. Do you know if they have private well or if they are using town water?
They do not. We called them and told them
You did?
to change the times that they're irrigating.
Okay.
So the exception to the current calendar outdoor water use is the establishment of new lawns and during the months of May and September. It just doesn't look good. Obviously, we're watering
Yeah.
on Main Street downtown for those that don't want to scroll through the pages of the exceptions, right? So we've asked them to change the times. They do not have a well. On that same note, there are many water districts in the area that are moving towards, are moving away from allowing people to install irrigation systems on town water supply or district water supply and requiring people to install private wells if they want to run an irrigation system. That might be one consideration that the town might want to make in future years to try to still allow people to irrigate their lawns, but just with a private well. There are a number of those throughout town, a number of residences, condo associations, private properties that have their own wells for irrigating the lawn, and this restriction does not apply to that. We don't have any authority over private wells or the use of that water.
There was a conversation last year about that, though.
Yeah, we,
State legislator going in and telling people that if there's a water ban in
There
your
was.
town, your private well it applies.
yeah, we don't have any, no, we don't have any authority on that. And really looking at the amount of water that those private residents are using versus where our wells are located in the areas of influence, it's gonna have minimal impact on, our water supply. We monitor our well levels, and if they start to drop and we're not running our wells, it's because they're being drawn down by other wells. We haven't really experienced that, so.
And the other point that I would make is, the town should follow its own rules, so the schools shouldn't be, you know, watering, the football field and whatever, and that's gonna cause some concern for people. And the firefighters can't be out washing the trucks, you know, 3 days a week or whatever, however often. I'm not picking on anybody, but, it just looks bad when the community itself violates its own rules. And
Agreed.
other people are saying, why can't I do the same thing with my property?
So we haven't turned on, so the sprinkler system at Full Field will be turned off. We try to make sure we run that during the hours that are appropriate. Exception to the water ban is for health and safety, and that includes the maintenance of emergency vehicles for response. So police vehicles, DPW vehicles, fire response vehicles are exempted from that water restriction. So we'll make a conscious effort, and I'll be in touch with both chief of police and the fire chief, and obviously my crews to make sure we're minimizing any use, but still making sure that we maintain equipment for safety reasons.
Thank you.
So, and I know also as part of the content here were the updated rules and regulations piece. And I recall the conversation that we had a couple of meetings back on the changes and bringing them up to date. And at the time, your observation that doing a red line would be difficult given the scope of how the team went about doing the updates.
Right.
Is that something?
So that was another item I was gonna speak to tonight.
Okay.
If there's not any more questions on that restriction. So I provided copies, so we'll start with the water, since you mentioned that one. So there is the original water rules, or current rules and regulations as it applied to water. And going through those, really, nothing has been removed, it's just been expanded and more detailed in the new document. So there's less gray area, there's more authority for the town and better defined situations that we've run into during my time or time in the past. The only thing that we really removed is the conservation-based water rates and how those are defined within the rules and regulations. We've separated those out, and there's a fee schedule that the selectmen had voted on 2 years ago, 2016. So we've broken that out as its own fee schedule, and that's updated from time to time when the selectmen vote on new rules and regulations. Everything else is still touched upon in the proposed revision for water. just, like I said, more defined. So I provided that old one. You can see it's 7 pages with definitions as compared to, was it 24 pages on the newer one.
Okay, so, we can put that on the next agenda, or two, and this.
Yeah, so it gives you some time to review both and to see if there's any, differences or anything, questions that, from the previous to the newer recommended version. The sewer regulations, we don't have any currently, so the copy that you got last time is from scratch. So we've just kind of been following, I guess, past practice and, best effort for however many years. So we kind of wanted to find something and make sure that we're following standard business practice for sewer and handling that business. So I don't know if there's any questions on that or concerns, but.
Okay.
I don't know if the board would want to vote on at least just the sewer one tonight.
Because it's new.
We'll do them all at once,
Okay.
just make it easy.
I'll make sure I'm at the next meeting when you want to discuss if there's any questions, so.
Yeah, because this has been carried over for a while now, right?
Yeah, my only concern, I just wanted to, we have a lot of new developments coming to town, and some of these changes are gonna be, protect the town and give us some more review authority and for those larger developments, so I wanted to make sure we get these, so we're in a better place.
Because that was part of the conversation I think we had at the last meeting when we were going through with the attorney about the process of 40Bs, right? Was that it was important to have regulations in place before any agreements get pursued. Otherwise, it gets kind of grandfathered in, for lack of a better phrase, using the previous regulations that were on the book, right?
We can have
So.
it done by June 19th,
You'll be short a couple of members that night.
that's okay.
Yeah, I'll be there.
That means we need less votes.
No, still need 3 votes.
Anyway, we'll do it on June 19th. We'll see who's here and see what happens. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah, I'll be there.
Can we make sure you put those on that agenda, Beck?
Yes, I will.
Please. Please and thank you. Anything else?
Did you have any questions on the bridges?
No, I mean, just if you could refresh me, I know I know Florida Road, this is an update, they've done initial assessment, so the letter that came in is sort of their updated.
Yeah, so
Assessment
they do
on it?
regular inspections of all the
Yeah.
bridges in town. So we have 11 bridges in town, 2 of them are owned by Mass DOT, the rest of them are, 8 of them are owned by the town, 1 privately owned. So we do our own inspections in-house with our engineering firm, DOT also comes through and inspects them. The Florida Road had 3 deficiencies that were on there as poor and fair, 2 poor and I think 1 fair. They're in the work right now of planning on a design for
Yeah.
placement of that bridge.
That's what that's why I couldn't remember is where we were on that design piece, because I know there's issues too with the way the parcels are and.
Yeah, they recently did some boring samples last month, core samples of the area, and we anticipate some design may be done in the next year in construction 2020 range.
And hopefully with state grants to help us.
Absolutely.
Perfect, thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Okay, so we have a public hearing that was scheduled for 7:15 for Thai chili. So it is 7:20, and we will open the public hearing, and I will read the legal notice into the record. The legal notice reads, "Notice is hereby given in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 138, as amended, that a public hearing will be held on Tuesday, June 5th, 2018, at 7:15 PM in the Michael J. Gianotis Meeting Room of the Maynard Town Building on the application for a change of beneficial interest amendment, application for Sumali Chanchara, membership interest purchase agreement for the common victual license for Thai Chili House, DBA Thai Chili, 40 Main Street. Copy of the application is on file in the office of the Selectmen. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you. I'm nervous.
You're nervous?
The first
I
time.
love nervous people. Okay, so this is just, you're buying the restaurant?
Yes,
Okay, now, this doesn't have anything that says anything about the liquor license, is that part of it? So it is part of it, right?
Mhm.
Because it doesn't say that in this legal notice, but. Okay, so when are you buying it? When do you anticipate buying it?
On January 31
January 31 of this year or next year?
this year,
So you already did buy it?
2018.
So you
this
did-
year.
So you did buy it in January?
Yeah,
Okay. So now we're just gonna transfer the liquor license?
yes, yeah, still.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Did I say your name right?
No. Excuse me, can you
Did I say your name right?
Yes, Sumali Chanchala.
Okay, I wanna make sure I said it right. Does anybody have any questions?
I guess my only question was, how did you learn about the business and what led you to want to take over the ownership of Thai Chili?
How to learn, right? We have one in Boston,
Mhm.
but my friend want to sell it to me.
Oh, so you know the current owners of this
No.
one, so it's, got it. Thank you.
Is the name staying the same? Is it still going to be Thai
In-
chili?
Another one in Boston named Chili Duck.
Is this one here in Maynard going to remain the same name?
Same name,
Same name.
all the same.
Okay.
And for the liquor license purposes, we always ask questions about that somebody has, that the manager has tip certified. You are tip certified, or some of the person working there will be tip certified?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, okay,
Mhm.
great.
Could I ask a question?
It's open here. Anybody that would like to ask a
The
question?
gal that is listed as the manager was the prior owner, correct?
Correct.
Yes, so she's staying there?
Yeah, she stay there.
Okay, so those are the same folks that will be cooking there?
Yeah.
You really won't be at this restaurant very much, right? You'll
Yep.
be at your duck chili?
Yep.
More of the time?
She both of them stay there, the
So
same.
you're just the owner
Yeah.
that,
Yep.
oh, got it,
Tom
okay.
Fan will be here. and
Welcome
there.
to Maynard.
Thank you. I'm good for come to Maine too.
So do you have any questions, Sharon?
No, I guess the only question I have is just, seeing as we are now all hyper attuned about the disconnect between the license hours on the application versus the license as listed on the hours as listed on what we sign. We just need to figure that out.
But when you look at the actual application from the ABCC.
It will have the correct stuff.
Yeah, it does state that their,
Perfect. 6 days.
weekdays equals 6 days.
Got it.
And Sunday is the odd.
That makes
odd
me
day.
thrilled to hear, Becky. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions? It's a public hearing, so if anyone else has any questions, now would be the time. Okay. Have any questions, I will read the motion that we have to address, and the motion is that we move to accept and approve the amendments to the license for the following: change of beneficial interest and membership, interest purchase agreement for Thai Chili House, 40 Main Street, Maynard. Second.
I will second.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Good luck.
Congratulations.
Good luck, good luck.
Thank you. I'm done.
You're done, thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
See, it wasn't that scary.
And we'll close this public hearing at 7:20.
Absolutely.
So we'll close the public hearing at 7:25 and make a motion to do so. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. All right, we're up to 12, which is the Powder Mill Place. There's no action, it's just a discussion. There's the recommended action, establish a process to determine if the town may endorse the proposed project. The process should include public meetings and a development agreement, so we just wanna. Okay.
So, as described in the packet, we've been meeting informally with the developer since the spring or summer of 2017. The developer's looking to move forward with the process, and it's time for us to bring this into more of a public forum for open discussion about it. So a public meeting is the appropriate place for that. Coinciding with that, we should be negotiating a development agreement, and the most expedient way to do that is for the Board of Selectmen to assign it to the town administration, with or without a member of the board involved. and then bring it back to the board for approval. If you have more than one board member assigned to it, the whole negotiation needs to take place in public. Many people recommend that the development agreement be negotiated in public regardless. I'm not opposed to that. The only benefit of doing it with only one selectman or none is that we don't have the 48-hour posting requirement. We can hold the meetings as needed. So that's not really a barrier to having negotiation. We can post the meetings regardless.
I think the idea of negotiating any agreement would be to negotiate it in this room in an open meeting, considering what, the point that we may or may not be at. That's the first thing. The second thing is, since last April, when they first came, we haven't seen any type of, we don't even have plans or any of those type of things at this point.
That's the purpose of the public meeting. The negotiations for a development agreement can take place as those things are being refined, and might even inform it. If the agreement is to do certain things, the project might change its scope, and that would obviously change those plans. But getting some of that feedback iteratively from the general public would help inform the development agreement process as well. So I'd like to schedule a public meeting in June if possible, possibly as early as the 18th or the following week, and have basically refresh the public from the original presentation that was done, I believe, at the library about 8 months ago, so that folks in town are informed about the current status of the developer's plans and can start weighing in on the pros and cons.
Are you talking about Joel's presentation that he made to everybody in November?
Mhm.
I believe that was the time, yeah, so maybe 6 months back.
Okay. And
Go ahead, Chris.
so there's also the issue of, and I don't know, where this takes place or how it takes place in the intermunicipal agreement we talked about at the last meeting we had where this came up. Have we reached out to Acton, or, when will we do that? When should we do that? When's that's appropriate?
So we haven't reached out to them formally. They have a new town manager starting, and they're in the same situation as us with waiting for the developer to sort of commit to this is what they're going to do. They're going to do this, and then we can sort of figure out what happens between the two of us. But with Steve Ledoux retiring, having that meeting was put off.
I know he has talked about he wants to do his lip and file his lip, and then he wants us to support it. It's kind of difficult to support something you haven't seen in over a year, and you don't know what the current status is. So we need to get him to we need to have that presentation made as well.
To that point, though,
That's exactly what we're doing.
I thought Bill had said that, like, before we would even have a public meeting or there was something to discuss, he had to formally, like, apply, like, some kind of concise plan, and we haven't received any of that. Everything, has just been kind of up in the air. There's no, this is exactly what we're doing, this is our plan, here's our engineering. I know there's been some, like, small working groups on it, but he hasn't come forward and said, here's my application. So from Bill's presentation, I thought that would happen before we have a discussion, because otherwise we're just kind of turning the wheels and hypothetically talking about something that hasn't really been put in front of us.
So this is exactly what's happening. So the developer would like us to create the letter of endorsement, which then is attached to the application, which is called the LIP, a local initiative petition. The letter of endorsement is what makes it a local, right? It's coming from us and the developer to the state. In order for that to happen, we have to do all the things that you're referencing. We have to have these conversations in public, get community input. The board needs to make a decision if this is good for the community. It may or may not include a development agreement. All those things happen before the letter of endorsement.
So I
No
think,
one's asking for the letter of endorsement and then do all that other stuff. Just the opposite. The developer's saying, we've talked about this sort of at a high level from a distance infrequently long enough. I'd like to move forward and get this done.
and I think what Melissa's seeking to clarify is what exactly the inputs and reference documents would be for that public hearing. So I think the question is that as an input and reference document for that public hearing, for it to be useful would be to have an update of what the project looks like.
So that's
Because,
exactly right. It's a public meeting, first of all.
Yep.
And that would be the purpose of it, to refresh us and update us on whatever the plans are. I don't know what they are, other than these sort of high-level conversations.
So Joel would be there, the one bringing that information? It wouldn't just be us starting a conversation on,
I would suggest that maybe the first 20 minutes is a refresh from Joel about, here's what the developer would like to do, and then we open it up to community input.
Couple things. First off, I don't think any discussion should take place at this point. July 1, we have 2 new members of this board coming on board. And I think we should wait until those members are seated so that we have, going forward, it's consistent. So you don't have one meeting where something is presented. I don't see the rush. It seems like there's been a real rush. Well, we've had other discussions that we won't get into where, but anyway, we have yet to speak to the town of Acton. We have yet to speak to the Acton Water District. I have not heard anybody comment tonight about our issue with sewer and how the sewers play into this thing and how Acton participates with us and what Acton's contribution might be, not Acton's Water District, but Acton versus Acton's Water District. We have not done anything to prepare ourselves for a process where we're involving ourselves with another community. Zero. Has there been any discussion by this board with the town of Acton in any fashion?
David, I think the purpose of putting this on the agenda tonight was to start that entire conversation. No one's
You
looking to...
suggested we speak on June 19th, when July 1, we have new board members coming.
I did not, David. I said we could have a public meeting as early as June 18th or the week after. That's all I said. I'm not trying to ask the board to make a vote. I'm not
I
asking
didn't
for anybody
suggest
to...
that. Why not wait until the board that sits and listens to the presentation, that is asking the questions as members of the board, can be the same board members that will be making that decision when it comes time to make that
but those
decision?
board members are gonna be in the room. I assume they're gonna be sitting here, and the public has been asking for a meeting for months now.
And the public has been rejected a meeting for months now. There's been no meetings.
That's not true. I know,
Name the last time we had a public meeting here about this
But
topic.
because we didn't have the triggers on this. I mean, I don't,
I don't understand what
The last public meeting was the meeting in the library that the developer put forth his thoughts and his ideas and answered questions for upwards of an hour and a half to 2 hours. Nobody has walked in this room and asked to have a meeting since then. No one's approached me about having a meeting, ever. We had one meeting here, one night here, where we had a parade of people yelling and screaming about certain things, and I told them we would have a public meeting about this topic before we did anything.
I think you actually said it would be a
I
public
didn't say
hearing.
hearing, I said a meeting, but it's, regardless, that was the last discussion that I ever had with anybody about a public hearing.
I was approached on the day after town meeting by a member of the public who said, now that the town meeting's behind us, it's time to bring this forward. That person's here tonight. And this is the time to do it. We're not looking to make a decision on July 10th or June 10th or whatever. We're looking to make a decision at some point in the future. If we wait until July, then it's just another month down the road. And it's another 2 months. It's not a good time in the summer to hold public meetings. The community continues to find reasons to not make a decision about this project. We need to bring it in front of us, or the developer is going to go down the comprehensive permit route.
The feedback that I've gotten, quite frankly, on the street is that the community is ready to resoundly say no.
They can, David, that is their prerogative. That's what we're looking to do, is to get the community's input on this. But if we do nothing, the developer will go the comprehensive permit route.
so just to try and level set for a moment, the purpose of the public hearing that we would have, or public meeting, excuse me, the purpose of the public meeting is not decision-based. It is an airing and discussion-based, so that the expectation would be to open a meeting, have the attorney representing the project do a 20-minute presentation and update, and then basically have an open forum with whoever wants to come from the public to ask questions, to talk about it. We could explore things that the developer might be thinking about in terms of a development agreement, not with the idea to come from that and say, and now let's vote now as a board to do X, Y, or Z, but rather to initiate the public process and public dialogue about the project, after which next steps would then be scheduled, i.e. whether or not that is the decision to identify which member of the, that by this date, which is the first meeting of the new board, we will formally vote on who would serve as the representative. We will decide, because I fully, as a member of the board who will not be present past the end of June, I fully take on board the importance of having newly elected members as those who are voting on the process. I don't want the element of vote, however, to stand in the way of us moving a process forward. That's why we have elections. That's why we have terms. And so I think if we're all in agreement and have a shared understanding that the purpose of the hearing is to initiate the dialogue that the town's been asking for, I don't understand why not to start, even if it's a contentious dialogue, I don't understand why not to start that
I agree.
sooner
And
rather than later.
David's point on the new board members coming on, my understanding is legally one of the new board members has to recuse himself anyways. So it doesn't seem to make a difference.
So the purpose of the meeting is, as Ms. Steele indicated, and I would envision probably 2 and possibly 3 of these types of meetings, probably spread out over June, July, maybe even August, coinciding with the development agreement negotiation, which would be informed in part by those public meetings. What's important to the community, what's not important, what's a deal breaker, moving those 2 things forward on perhaps iterative or even
When's
parallel
the discussion
tracks.
with Acton?
Excuse me?
When's the discussion with Acton?
That's all part of that process, David. And then maybe it's July, maybe it's August, maybe it's September. At some point, the community says, we're satisfied with this process, and we're either ready to endorse or not endorse this process. That's the intention. It's not a rush, but there's no time like today to start.
The town of Acton is less further along in this process than we are, by the way. So their selectmen, half of them have no idea what we're even talking about when we go to talk to them at this point.
Have you spoken to them?
I've spoken to a couple of them at Magic meetings and MAPC meetings and those type of things. And, so we're a long way from anything. And I'm not in a rush to meet June 19th, 18th, to 25th, or until there's,
So then you agree with me, there's no rush to have it on the 19th?
I haven't said there's a rush to do anything.
So then you're in agreement, there's no need to meet in June on this, we can wait until the new board is
I
seated.
think
We
there's a
can wait.
risk.
There's a risk in waiting, and the risk is that he'll go the unfriendly route. And I think that's a risk for this town. Because if you get it stuffed down the throat, you might save the fact that you might save a little wear and tear on a sewer system, and you might save certain things, but you also stand to lose some things in some of your ability as a town to control any aspect of the project. So that's a concern for some. But that doesn't mean that we have to jump in and do it right now. But we sit and feign disgust anytime someone suggests that Maynard is not business or development friendly. Yet we continue to discuss and tell everybody every time something comes before us, put it off, put it off, put it off. At some point, we have to act. And that action is, it's coming. Because if this guy jams us down the town's throat, and we lose the opportunity to have any say in any piece or any part of the project, which is what could happen, very well happen. And again, every lawyer that we have hired and we've paid to do the math and do the history for us has told us that we are very unlikely to win a challenge to an unfriendly 40B, regardless of what anyone in the room says or anyone else. The 2 lawyers
If I
we
may.
have on retainer for this town, both do this for a living, day to day, day in, day out, and they've both told us repeatedly, you will not win that battle, Maynard.
And I think what I'd like to
So
just,
it's a risk to wait, but I don't have a problem waiting. If
And it-
that's the majority opinion, we'll wait.
and I
But
think my only comment on this is that I would ask as a board, I'm a little bit troubled by even use of the word rush, because I don't think that the intent of having this agenda item is to rush something, because I think using that word implies, again, somehow that there's some nefarious plan afoot to push something through. And the way I read this agenda item and the way I understood sort of the discussion to date is that we have all, as individual members of the board, have had conversations since this project was first raised back in the spring. It's more about demonstrating to our constituents in the town that we've heard that and that we want to actively make a decision and a thoughtful plan of how to engage the public in the dialogue. So whether that answer is to start that later this month, whether the answer is to start that at the beginning of next month, I think that was the intent of the agenda item, not to necessarily preclude anything else. So it's more demonstrating that we have to continue to do the business of the town even when we're in a period of transition as an elected body. So if the consensus is that it makes more sense to have a planned meeting and schedule that later, when there's a new board, so be it. But I just want to kind of level set that there seems to be a degree of, to me, a bit unnecessary anxiety about the schedule of timing, when the important thing here and the intent is to demonstrate that we want to be initiating a public dialogue around what is a very important project.
I don't know how we suggest we're rushing. It's been 16 months. and
Well,
we
I
haven't
think it's somewhat
figured it out.
ironic that when this issue came up initially, about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, the first time we ever heard about it, I believe it was you, Chris, who emphasized we should wait until the new members were on board before we proceeded. And at that point, I think it was Cheryl who was coming on board. It may have been even prior to that. It may have been the prior election.
It was me, because nobody wanted to be on the working group, so they were waiting for me so they could put me on the working group.
I don't necessarily think that that's the truth.
That's
It
pretty
was,
much
he asked me while I was in the audience.
She was sitting here when we had the conversation.
So anyway, but.
Wait a minute,
but-
wait a minute. If you're gonna make a statement that is wrong, at least allow it to be corrected. The reason we waited
Oh, go ahead.
was because nobody wanted to sit on that working group. And I said, Melissa, would you be willing to sit on that working group when you are a member of the board in full? And she said yes. And that's the only reason we waited.
Well, I believe that there was some
That's
conversation
the
about
only
waiting
reason
until
we
we had
waited.
new members.
That is the only reason we waited, David, period. There's no discussion about it. You're wrong. That's the reason we waited. We waited because Melissa was the only person willing to sit on that group and the person that had time to sit on that group.
So the bottom line is we know we need to have a public meeting and that we want to have a public meeting to move forward on the project. I think the question becomes now, and not that there's even any action before us right now other than to say that we want to have the process. So we're all agreed that we want to have a public meeting and that we want to organize it the way in which Andrew laid out in terms of an agenda. And then I just think the question is looking at timing.
I think, Andrew, for our next meeting, we should have a, to David's point, in some of the concerns that David has and everyone else has is, develop a punch list for us, for the town of Maynard. Conversations with Acton. The most recent and up-to-date Stantec information for the sewage and those type of issues. And then all the other issues that obviously fall in place behind those things. When will the meetings take place? Who will officiate those meetings? What will the input of the developer be at those meetings? All those type of things that we're talking about tonight need to end up on one piece of paper and use it kind of as a guide for the board and for, it's a public document, so anyone that wants to have a look at it can have a look at it and know, when certain things might take place and what order they might take place. I'm not even sure the order that these things have to take place. All the things that we've discussed tonight and the things that are gonna come up.
And I do think to that point, like as we think through what would be the agenda of the public meeting, I think there is, to Chris's point, we would want to think through other pieces of discussion that we'd want to have formally part of that. So like a presentation by Aaron backed up by Stantec that kind of recaps some of the things that we most recently went through with them around the mapping of the sewer pipes and where their gaps are. I think comments, the chief and we can think through from first responders perspective, but just kind of going through some of the questions that have been out from the community already around the project, so that the right people that can kind of be part of that dialogue with the community can either prepare that discussion by having a couple of slides or something available as part of the outset of the meeting, or at least are in the audience so that if members of the community have questions about it, the right people are there to answer it. Because I think that's often something that becomes a point of frustration, is that we don't have necessarily the right folks in the room. And then there's a feeling of, well, I had this question, but we had to delay, and now I have to come back next week to get the answer to the question. So I think if we can kind of think through for that meeting, going back over the questions and dialogues that came up, going back over some of the questions that came in that meeting that the developer hosted at the library back in the late fall, and kind of use that as a way to architect the meeting. Because to me, the most important thing is not a meeting for meeting's sake, but a meeting to get to the heart of what the community wants to know and understand, the issues that folks have, so that we're all working off the shared sense of the best way forward.
Could you get that done before you leave?
And the one other comment I want to make is,
Yes?
Would you entertain perspectives from the audience who's here and saw this on the agenda?
Would I entertain what?
Would you entertain a couple perspectives from people from the audience who saw this on the agenda? And
Sure.
before that, though, can I make a quick comment?
Who wishes to speak? Yeah, okay.
Before those comments,
Okay, what time is it? So, we want to wait, so we'll have that part of the meeting till 8 o'clock, and then you can finish with your comments. Is that okay?
okay.
So, whoever would like to speak, you gotta speak at the microphone, introduce yourself, and we have till 8 o'clock for that part of the meeting.
Ken Estabrook, 28 McKinley. So I guess my points would be brief. One, if the application is ready to go forward, in other words, there is a complete application, a plan, and so forth for you all to consider. If there is not that, then I think you should wait. Get all the materials together. But once the materials are together, I would strongly encourage you to open this up to discussion. I'm more concerned about the rush between meetings rather than the rush to start meetings. Okay, so based on our past experience with 129 Parker Street, we started that process with what was an incomplete application. And so I certainly share Selectman Gavin's perspective that, you know, we shouldn't be rushing to start if we have an incomplete application. But once you have that, there are members of the community here who would like to weigh in on it. And so I think once it's complete, then we ought to have it. And that way we can have deliberative meetings, whatever number we have, and then we can sit here and talk about it as a community. So that's what I'd offer.
Same perspective as David does as far as the rush. There is no rush. So, you know, let's dispel that myth. There's no rush on this board's part, at least from where I'm sitting, and obviously David feels the same way, to rush into this. But to not even be at the point where in the back of your mind, you're considering, you know, accepting the application and whatnot is not a good place to be either. But someone else had a question?
Ron Calabria, Deer Path. The thing that concerns me is, you know, we wind up talking about 40Bs and are they going to do a lip, are they going to do an unfriendly? So I feel like we're being pressured to do something that we didn't really decide to do on its own merits. And there's, whether we win a 40B or not, a couple years ago, we thought we had 4 or 5 acres of extra in the 1.5% calculation. That may not be a good thing, but the way I look at this is, and what happened with us with Parker Street, is the developer comes in and says, what's the maximum thing I can do? 250 units, whatever. And then we sort of try to take 5 units off of that. I look at it differently. I look at it and say, what could be done there by right? And then how much would we increase that for certain reasons, whether it's to get affordable housing or some revenue. And so if you do that, on Maynard's property, it's single-family housing. So if you said, that's 9. If you said, well, you know, multifamily would be okay, that's 19. They're asking us for 76. So I would more come out and say, well, if it was 5,000 square feet or unit, you'd get 107 units. Tell me why we should support something between 107 and 250, whatever that number is. And that's not a discussion that I've ever heard happen. The other thing is, there is this 40B thing, but the other thing is, if you read the town reports, this Acton sewer plant is at 84% capacity 3 years ago. So whether we can be forced, if that's the right word, or pushed to do this under some perceived, they'll do it unfriendly, we won't get anything, that's to be determined. That's the reason you go talk to Acton's Board of Selectmen and find out, do they have a sewer alternative or they don't have a sewer alternative? And that informs us, I think, on how far we want to go in terms of size and scope of a project, putting aside if we want a project. And, certainly that property could be developed, but 107 is kind of a number, and then there's 250. So I'd like us to talk more about,
What's 250? What do you?
that's what they're requesting.
I think this isn't analogous to Parker Street though, and I think that's a misconception.
I'm not making an analysis.
But 40B isn't an option. We don't get to say like, hey, we don't want any 40B project. That's what separates us. That's what puts us in such a difficult position as a town.
I didn't say anything about we don't support 40B. I've always supported 40B. I supported affordable housing
But
at Parker Street. What I'm saying is that if 40B or not, no Maynard sewer, no project, unless there's another alternative. And so my research says there isn't an alternative. So for me, the issues are density, height, those things. Those things get mitigated with a smaller project. So if I'm negotiating with a developer, I'd like to know, what are the leverages and how do we go about having a project that possibly is smaller scale? That's me. So sewer drives the size. They then come in, once we say if we're going to do sewer, then they can say, well, with 40B, I can get as big a project as I'd like. So if we find out that, in fact, Acton can't provide sewer and we can, the 40B is irrelevant. That's my point. And then the project isn't 72 feet high and it isn't dense. It's something more scalable. And, 107, 125, 130, I don't know. So that's the way I would
Are you
approach
talking
it.
about units in Maynard?
No, in total. Because we're giving them the sewer. And how
We're
much?
giving them anything.
Well, okay, I'm saying,
Everyone's making an assumption that we've given them anything. We haven't given anybody anything. And the maximum number of units that are gonna end up in the town of Maynard that have been discussed so far and have been presented so far is 80. And he's told us he's gonna come down off that number. So we haven't promised or given anybody anything. Again, that's the huge misconception, is that
I don't have a misconception, Chris, I'm fully aware of
There's
this project.
there's a misconception that we've agreed to give somebody something. We haven't agreed to accept anything nor give anything. We haven't even seen the plans yet.
And my question is,
To your point, and to Ken's point, we haven't received a set of plans. We haven't received a request for permits, we haven't received anything. Other than we saw a PowerPoint presentation in April of 2016. 2017, we saw a PowerPoint a year ago, that's all we've seen.
So my point simply is that we should be determining whether we want to provide sewer or whether we have to. And the proposition has been made in this room several times that, Acton can provide an alternative, therefore they'll just do the unfriendly 40B, and therefore we'll be subject to something we don't like. And I'm saying we should test that premise, that's all I'm saying.
No question.
Thank you.
No question. I think the gentleman behind you was waiting first, but yeah, you can go after him.
Chuck Parchinsky, Deer Path. Chris, I have a question for you based upon a follow-up to Ron. You said you had numerous discussions with our town councils about 40B.
Mhm.
If it were unfriendly, can they force us on water and sewer?
No,
They can't.
they can't
Okay.
force us to do anything.
Then I think it'd be real simple right now for the board to vote, have a vote and say we don't move forward unless Acton's providing water and sewer. Because I just sat through, Aaron left, didn't he? His presentation where we just put an emergency ban in place on water. And we have, 323 units coming up online on Parker Street in the near future, plus all that retail space. I guess my question is, where's all this water gonna come from?
We're talking about sewer, not water. We're not talking about giving them water, we're talking about giving them sewer.
Just giving them sewer?
And if they build those units in Maynard, whether, you know, no matter what, the Maynard, we still have to give them our water. The Maynard units will get our water.
Have to get our water?
Well, we are, you know.
Okay, was the initial plan to give them water and sewer for the entire project?
I haven't seen the plan.
Okay, that's I'm
The
just
initial
basing that.
discussion, now, here's what we were told, that when he first came. There was his take, right, was it, in the take of some interpretation of his discussion was that we, as a community, no one on this board sat in on the meetings, no one on this board had met the gentleman before that evening, that we, as a community, had met with them and acting together, and that we had promised them our sewer. Correct? That was the
That's what
initial,
he-
that
that's
was,
what he portrayed.
that's what he presented. We have not promised anybody anything, obviously. And, you know, Ron and I have talked, Ron has, you know, given us a lot of information and shared with us a lot of facts that he's looked up about the water and the sewer and all those things. So I'm not, you know, if it's gonna hurt the town, we're not gonna do it, obviously. But we, as a town, if they build the units in Maynard, we have to, you know, offer them our water
Correct,
and our sewer.
correct.
We don't have to offer anybody an Acton anything. And they, you know, they're prepared to get on the Acton water.
Okay.
But
In none of the
not the
presentations,
sewer.
they never asked for Maynard water, they only asked for
Well,
Maynard
well-
sewer in the presentations.
Which
not-
does not obviate the fact that we still have significant issues with
Right.
our sewer system.
My understanding from the presentation from the gentleman over at the school,
Yeah.
the so-called expert in everything, you know, on how many kids are gonna be in our school, how much this, how much that. I thought, my understanding was he said water and sewer. I don't know if other people were at that
No,
meeting.
he's-
That was my understanding. I must have misunderstood. him.
No, so it was suggested early on that there was a discussion that took place, and now, you know, as time has passed, no one's willing to admit that they were at that meeting. You know,
Okay.
we certainly weren't. So, you know, we're really, as far as, any type of discussion or negotiation for water and sewer, we're at square one. And we're not, you know, to Ken's point again, we don't have a project in front of us. You know, Bill Nems, the town planner, and the people downstairs who would take that project in and accept it for the town have not been offered anything. So there's really, I mean, you know, I understand Ron's points, and we like to argue just that it's, you know, that this is Tuesday, but, you know, we're far from anywhere, and I'm in no rush. And I don't think David's obviously not in a rush. Cheryl's not gonna be here. And, you know, so we're a long way from going anywhere, and, you know, we promised that we would have, you know, public input and public meetings and all those type of things, and, before we go anywhere, so, you know.
It might be helpful, a few meetings ago, town council did present on the 40B, kind of overview to us, and there weren't a lot of people there, but it did explain that they can't force us to give water and sewer to another town. They can only force us to do it to the units that they put up in our own town, and it kind of just explained the process about what the Board of Selectmen's role is, and then how it transitions to the planning board a little better, because it's such a complicated procedure, we were all a little confused.
It was,
I-
we highly recommend it
Sorry.
as a YouTube video.
I certainly like your suggestion that the board take a position on allowing sewer for any substantive amount of units. I certainly would have a problem if sewer was asked of us of any number of units. Now, what that number is, I don't know, but I would say anything more than 10 units at once
Well,
is
that would be the
probably.
Maynard portion.
Well, I'm talking about selling, in my opinion, we should pass a bylaw of some type that says that in order to sell sewer to another community, to anything in another community beyond 2 or 3 houses at one time, you know, you could work it up, but that it should be a town meeting vote, 2/3 town meeting vote, not up to the Board of Selectmen as, to sell the community sewer to some other town, which is basically what we're doing with this particular project, is, to me, not fair to the ratepayers of the town of Maynard.
Correct. Okay. I like that point of view.
I don't think anyone's expressed a different point of view. No one,
All
you
right.
know, so.
Good. Thank you very much.
Can just clap on.
Have to get someone a bigger grant.
Do you have one other question? Do you have time for the final question from the
Yeah,
audience?
one
or-
final question, please. Feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kevin Butler, Deer Path. I'll try and be brief to almost stay on your agenda. I just want to say that I do favor, as I think most of us do, the development of affordable housing in our town. since we can think about this independent of the Acton portion of it, which we cannot be forced to even consider, then my real issue is that we do this 40B in a style that's in conformity with Maynard's character. That we don't have a big wall of apartments or condos, a few feet off of Powder Mill Road, which is, for many people, the gateway to our town, such as it is. It seems like the sentiment is in favor of doing something that's in accord with Maynard, and let's scale it suitably and negotiate suitably, and then I think we can have the best of all possible worlds. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one point that I wanted to make, Chris, and that was there's actually two now, but the first one is that, the one that I wanted to make before we got into this conversation, was that I believe any discussion relative to a development agreement on a project of this scale should be public and should not be anywhere held in private. So I hope we can clarify that that will happen. And secondly,
We already did.
okay, good.
All along,
The second point is, to the scale and the size and the community and everything else, which I totally agree with, is that we need to make sure that things are compliant with what our community is all about. I heard during the discussion of this thing, after Joel made his presentation that he wanted to build this 70-foot tall building, that the closest building to us that is of that size is in Waltham. So that's what this proposed project a year and a half ago or a year ago, and again, no changes when he came into the library for the second presentation, it was exactly the same, despite the fact that he said, oh, we'll listen to your comments or whatever when he spoke to us. Tallest building around to Waltham. Is that what Maynard wants?
Mr. Chairman, it would appear we've had our first public meeting on this topic. I've written down a lot of notes.
Building at the mill, from the ground up.
It's about 65 feet to the top of Building 5.
And he was talking 70.
Yes, he was.
72.
I bet you could notice a difference if you're driving through.
It's
You're-
the tallest.
Listen,
Those
I don't
glasses
care-
are-
Chris
I don't
called,
care-
Chris
I
called me
don't- I
wrong
don't
before.
care- I don't care, listen.
I'm
I don't
right
care-
this time.
We're not gonna put balloons out there, though. I don't care what we do, as long as we're not putting balloons in the ground like we did up at 129 Parker Street to try and judge the height of the buildings. Anyway.
I had nothing to do with balloons.
I know.
So I've taken some notes, and as requested, I'll pull information together for our next agenda.
So I think that's where we're going with the punch list for the town, or, whatever, and certainly, when we get to the point where there's, a need for advice and counsel from the people of Maynard and the people in this room and others who have, opinions or thoughts about what we should do, we'll take those into consideration, and absolutely, I think that there's no question that moving forward with those type of things will require a town meeting vote, or a special town meeting vote. It's, we could craft an agreement all day, and, the people of Maynard will be voting on it. So far, we haven't crafted a whole lot of anything. But, we'll see. Anybody else? Once, twice, done. 129 update?
Very briefly, this afternoon I received a environmental report from VHB, our engineering company on the site, and it's in your packet. The project is moving along as intended. They are mostly keeping up with all the agreements on things like dust control and the fencing that had to be completed before they started in the next phases of the project. There's always, on projects like this, something that gets missed, and our engineer has been pretty tenacious about getting them to fix it before the next meeting. In the packet, there's a whole series of pictures of the current project, including a lot of the environmental things that we're monitoring. You're probably aware we have a well field not too far away from the project. You can see some pictures of turtles, a few other things that have been discovered on the site. It's really just that much of an update. There's really not much to tell. Things are moving along.
Did they update on finding a supermarket anchor to replace the market?
They are not publicly disclosing that they have an agreement, so I would say they do not. But they have indicated that they are and continue to negotiate, and not just looking for a partner, but negotiating with one.
There's a question in the audience.
Oh, sure. We're all about comments tonight. The floor is yours.
Trish Saunders, I'm in a butter, living on Detling Road. And I just would like to clarify that they're not completely in compliance, and I have been talking with the town planner and the town engineer, and I know they're trying to work with the developer on it, but they are well out of compliance for the schedule for building the landscape buffer. And they are now saying,
Behind?
yes, well behind, and they are now saying that they may have to delay to the fall because they can't get all of the stock. So I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I do think that Wayne and Bill are on it and in communication with the developer about it, but I just think it's important to know in a public meeting that that the commitment that they had to protecting the residential neighborhoods is really lagging.
Is that just the landscape butter or anything else? Have you noticed?
I don't know enough about the project to be able to know what they're supposed to be doing inside. But all of the landscape planting was supposed to be completed by June 12th, and the product isn't on site yet. And they are now saying that they're having trouble getting the product because the product's in short supply, which is hard to imagine because they've known for a year that they needed this product, but.
When did you last speak to them?
I haven't had direct communication with the developer about this. I last spoke with Wayne about it just prior to this meeting. So he is aware, and I do think he's trying to work with them to figure it out.
So that's, and I don't mean to interrupt you, that's going on the, so as you look at, where you are, on the other side of that fence? Is that where you're talking about?
Yes, so on the southern buffer, they have planted one row of trees and they've installed the fence. There are 3 rows of trees due. On the northern side of the buffer, they've put in a fence. There are some trees due, I'm not sure how much, but they've done no trees up there.
Okay.
Are they saying that the type of tree is unavailable? Is that it? Because we could just.
The communication that they had with Wayne today said that the 10 to 12 foot trees are in short supply by their vendor. Sorry, what?
All 10 to 12 foot trees?
Well, or the ones so they're very specific species that are supposed to go in places. Like it's a very specific landscape plan. But I just felt like it was important to clarify that they're not completely in compliance. The planning board agreement is very clear that permits aren't supposed to be issued until the landscape buffer is complete. And the developer didn't seem to have ordered the stock in a responsible time and says they can't get all of the stock from their vendor. Hopefully, Wayne and Bill can encourage them to find another vendor. So, thank you.
They have a well.
They do not.
I think they're supposed to truck the water in for irrigation.
They're going to have to with the new water ban that was implemented tonight.
They got plenty of
They don't have
trucks.
anything to water.
I think there's in it 3 or 4 of those tanks out there, right? There's 3 or 4
And they
tank trucks.
buried or at
That's,
least
that's right now for dust control.
the fake pond is gone. I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, it's not there.
They have a lot of flooding water there.
Andrew, on your TA report,
Yes.
we're up to now, right? What does the first line say? It says fiscal year end staff spending encumbrance and payroll directives have been issued by me and the finance director. What does that line tell us?
So, I'm sorry, yeah, it's not perfectly clear. At this time of year, we ask department heads to do a couple of things with their budget. One is to make sure that they don't have any overages that they're concerned about, and also to stop spending. If they haven't bought something at this point in the year, they probably don't need it. And that's a routine thing that goes out. I wanted to just let the board know that we are always looking to not waste the taxpayers' money, and we do not have a spend it or lose it philosophy.
Okay.
So, but it also helps the finance director and I plan for anything necessary out of a reserve fund if a budget is over, let's say an overtime budget or something.
add to that.
The only thing I wanted to add is on the bicycle, on the criterion racing bicycle thing. It's mentioned in the TA report area. So they're looking to do this race through the downtown, closing part of the downtown for about 7 or 8 hours on a Wednesday evening in August. And it seems like it's going to be a tremendous impact. We're working with the Recreation Commission and the race director to see if there's a way to make this work. When I say we, the police chief and I have met with the race coordinator. I'm not sure it's going to happen. One of our concerns, for instance, they wanted to loop through Maine, Summer, and Nason, and we thought maybe there's some alternative routes we can make this work from a traffic perspective, but they're cutting off our fire station for 7 hours with that particular looping. So, you know, no matter what we did, that's just one example. We're looking at lots of different alternatives, and it may or may not work.
Have we asked for feedback from downtown businesses on how they feel? Because usually they're pretty against closing.
So we put that on the sponsor of this to say, come back to us with a plan that you think is workable. Our chief will weigh in on it from public safety standpoint, but it needed to have that feedback from the downtown businesses to say, we're in support of this because it's going to bring thousands of people as spectators in. So it's one of those events that could be really cool, but we're not sure that Maynard's a good fit for it.
Wednesday nights, we also have the Maynard Community Band playing at Memorial Park
What type of race is this?
from
It's a bike
6 to
race.
9.
Okay, into when? In August?
It goes all
When
the
I
way
join
to
this
the
one,
end of August.
Put our suits on.
I'll take a picture and post
2
it.
p.m. to
tomorrow.
9:30.
Bicycle bill for 2?
The races are, but the logistical setup would require the street closings.
Concert, I think, is like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, but it would be in the middle of the area.
right.
Yeah. So anyway, that's more of an update. You may be hearing about it through the rec commissioner from others in town. And I didn't want, because it can sound very dramatic when you hear it. I wanted to make sure you guys heard about it early on. No commitments have been made, and it'll come through you guys again before it does.
Anything, Melissa?
No, I mean, I just want to say thank you to the TA search committee. I think they did a great job, and they clearly put a lot of work to get us these last 5 candidates. So kudos to them in helping us out.
Still have to disband them.
We should keep
I
them
think
just in case.
that's automatically disbanded.
No,
Only-
we have to.
Only after an
No.
appointment is made.
We have to do it, yeah. But, okay. Anything, David?
Yeah, 3 things. First off, congratulations to the DPW and all of those that were involved in Memorial Day. Really was looking good, and thank you for all that you did to get it set up. And Andrew, I know you were there, and Becky, and it's a great community event. Secondly, for the board, for consideration, and I know we have to get an official notice per the charter, but just something to be on our radar. There's going to be the school committee opening that will be coming up. And so per charter, the school committee has to give us notice that there is an opening on their board. And then we have to be ready to act, because within a certain period of time, and I think it's 7 days if I'm not mistaken, we have to then call a joint meeting with the school committee. And we, along with the school committee, select a new school committee member to fill out the remainder of the year until the next term. But we've got to be ready for that once the school committee puts us on notice, because we're going to have to call a meeting, so all of us.
We're expecting the letter on Friday morning.
On Friday morning.
As of June 8th, right?
Yeah, so we should have it.
So theoretically, we
So
can,
she completes, she'll be done June 8th.
Yeah.
She's resigning as of June 8th, Mary Merge.
so then this current board would be the one that would have to act if they gave us a letter on the 8th of June. We'd have to have a meeting with the school committee sometime in that 7-day period.
I do have it on the agenda for the 19th.
Oh, okay. For an actual joint meeting? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of been going back and forth behind the scenes with the schools and Becky's office, so.
All right.
Put the charter and Lisa-
I know theoretically, there's not a need for a public announcement that there's an opening, but, people who are watching should be aware if anybody's interested, because you just come, I don't know what the process was. Last time we did it was, it was when Amy Gay got named, and that was years ago, so. Anyway, the third thing is, much to my chagrin and sadness, I realized this evening that tonight is actually Cheryl's last official meeting with us,
No.
because she won't be here
She'll
for
be
the,
here for the last.
she'll be here for the TA meetings, but for our
Currently, I'm
official-
not scheduled to be here the 19th.
Currently, she's not scheduled to be here the 19th, based on what she said earlier, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know, it's been a rapid promotion for me at Starbucks.
So
so.
Cheryl, thank you. It's been a pleasure, even though it's been much a short time. Very much appreciate your efforts and your contributions and your guidance to me. Very, very helpful.
Thank you. So my comments, I mean, exactly echoing David, it's been such a pleasure to serve the town in this role, and an honor and a privilege and just a humbling experience. So my thanks and appreciation to all for your trust and the opportunity to be part of this process, and looking forward to working right through the last of it. Further to Melissa's point, just as a reminder for folks that we are continuing to do interviews for the town administrator position. We'll be meeting on Thursday evening, interviewing 2 more candidates, and then we have a meeting next Wednesday, interviewing the 5th and final candidate. So definitely encourage you to attend or watch that process. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. And so, all right. So,
Did you have anything?
what?
Did you have anything?
No, I didn't add anything at this point, no. I've been here for 4 days in a row. At this point, I'm making a motion that we move to an executive session from which we will not reconvene. So that would effectively adjourn this meeting. So I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second it.
All those in favor? And then into the executive session.
We'll stay here.
Yeah, we can stay here.
We're staying here?
Yep.